Hello again, guys. It is I, Free700. We are back with some Warhammer Fantasy lore. This time, what the fuck is runes? Now, this is going to be a very funny thing because I'm going to have to address it now so that way you guys don't get confused. But there are two types of runes in Warhammer Fantasy. There's the languages, which is what they name their characters is runes. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the magical stuff, the runecraft, the very interesting stuff, the stuff that actually goes bang. Yeah, we're going to be covering those because that's a lot more fun and a lot more American. So, what the fuck is runes? So, runes is essentially another way of casting spells, another way of using any sort of magical properties without actually being a wizard. This is something that is utilized by every race, even though every race, except for the dwarves, are magical to some extent. And with the high elves being the most magical, they usually don't have much usage of these magical runes. If anything, they usually just enchant their weapons and armor. They don't actually rune scribe it. This is something mostly dwarven in nature and of origin, is the art of rune crafting. Despite that, though, some wizards, especially in the human empires, will declare themselves master of runes, and they do not mean rune crafting runes. No, they usually mean magic, because they also call magic runes. Now we have like 3 different types of runes that exist in the Warhammer Fantasy universe. Whoo, yeah! We got the characters for their languages, then we got this master of runes asshole wizards, and then we got the actual runes that we're talking about. So, am I keeping you along for the ride? Because I sure hope I am. Here we go. The Dwarven runes are the most exquisite and the most powerful runes out of all the runes that do exist. Now, Chaos has runes, but they're more of a magical nature. Humanity has runes, but usually they're crafted by dwarves, and if not, then it's usually crafted by mages, so again, it's more of an enchantment rather than an actual rune. And you can usually tell when it's not a Dwarven rune. Here's the key tip. Here's the big key tip. If you see a weapon and it's either a sword or it's got multiple runes inscribed on it, it is not a dwarf weapon. Because runes that are dwarven made are so powerful that usually you'll just see one rune on the weapon. And if it's a very high quality thing, it may actually have 2 to 3 runes maximum. But this is how you can usually tell right off the bat if an axe that a Norskin is using that's enchanted or rune scribed is not of dwarven make is usually because it's got multiple runes written on it. Now, the runes that dwarves make are usually of ritual. They're performed of ritual stances where it could be something as meager as just simply striking the weapon 12 times every day at exactly this hour. It could be something more intricate like waiting for the exact day where the moon shines in the exact right face and there's no clouds in the sky and you perfectly bathe the blade in troll blood for those hours that the moon is up, and then while you're doing it, you're striking it on an anvil. It could be a very intense ritual that could take days, months, even years for a dwarf to actually craft one rune. But the quality is par none. The quality is just so superb that no other rune can break it. And this is where the difference between magical items and runic items does appear, is that runic items usually are dwarven made, but they do exist amongst Skaven, they do exist amongst humans. After all, banners usually are runic inscribed, they're not usually enchanted with magical properties by a wizard. And the main difference is mostly the creation process. You see, when a magical item is forged by, let's say, elves or forged by chaos, usually what it is that while the smithy or whatever is working the weapon or armor, the weapon or armor, once it's finished, may or may not have any magical properties at all. And the magical stuff comes in later during the usage. Some magical items are forged in magical properties, like we see this with Chaos exclusively. But usually when it comes to high elves and other races, usually they enchant these items after a while after it's already been forged. This could, of course, be a shield that saves the nobleman, so he'll enchant it. This could be a piece of armor that after years and years of service he may decide to enchant. Or it could be just a nobleman who says, oh, you're only defended by just a thin layer of mithril? Get some enchantments on that, and then they'll go do that. This, of course, is not something that a dwarf would do, because in order to make a rune, it has to be the same time the weapon is made. This way it is all bound together. You cannot put a rune into an already forged weapon. That is impossible to do. This is mostly because you're trying to trap the magic inside the weapon or armor rather than putting magic on top of it. That's the main way you can look at runes versus magically enchanted items. Is magically enchanting, you're just coating the weapon in the magic. Whereas the rune, you're actually making the weapon itself magical. The very essence of it is magic. This is, of course, something that can be a good or bad thing, depending on your personal preference of, oh, do I want a weapon like that I can use to channel the winds of magic? Then you're going to want an enchanted blade, because no rune is going to be able to do that. And also, the magic inside the blade can't just come out with a rune. No, you can't do that. And then, of course, it's other things too, like, do I want a piece of armor that will protect me permanently? Or do I want a piece of armor that protects me only when I activate it by channeling my power into it? Well, you're probably going to want to get a runic armor for that, because then it's always tough, no matter what. Now, runes do break. No matter what I've said, they can actually break. And part of that to blame is due to either the blunt force of the enemy that you're fighting. Some enemies just strike so fucking hard they'll shatter a magical item. That just can't be helped. Other parts, though, it's mostly because the runesmith behind it was shoddy with his workmanship. So sometimes a runic seal is not sealed in enough to the point that it's slightly oozing out that magical essence. And once it runs out, the weapon is useless. It's just a regular weapon or a regular armor or regular shield, whatever the fuck it is. Now it's just a regular thing that's got a little thing inscribed onto it that's absolutely dead and dry. This is, of course, something that Thoric Ironbrow does not stoop to. He makes sure that all of his runesmiths do not have oozing fucking runes. But, unfortunately, this is something that the dwarves have had to deal with, is that they'll come across ancient weapons and ancient armor of their past that have powerful runes that they've never seen in over a fucking 500 years. And then they'll take it and be like, oh, okay, cool, let's bring this to a runesmith so we can replicate it. And then the runesmith goes, how am I supposed to replicate this? The item's dead. You know that, right? Like, I can't even activate it to see what it potentially could have done. Like, it's dead as fuck. Now, that being said, just because a item is rune inscribed doesn't mean it just does that one thing. We see this a bit in the War of Vengeance. We also see this a bit with Thoric Ironbrow. We see this a few times with Neferata, is that when runes are being handled by runesmiths, people who are rune lords, they can also do other things with it that are almost downright magical. Like, just downright, it's almost like as if they're fucking wizards. We see this, like, a dwarf can have a rune of like lightning or something that shoots out lightning. But in the hands of anyone else, they would think that's all it could do. But in the hands of a runesmith, they could go, oh, not only is this the rune of lightning, but this is actually a key to a door. All I gotta do is just find the door, and then boom, I can unlock it. And the rune, if I tap it a little bit, it will tell me where that door is. This is something that Thoric Ironbrow does a lot. I'm so glad he's actually in the game now, Warhammer 2, because then I get to talk about him in the next video. But that's something that he's actually renowned for doing, is that he can tap and feel runes, and he can discover their origins, and he can also discover what other things they can do. Like the Anvils of Doom are these massive, massive, massive anvils that most people are afraid to strike because they don't know what they'll do. Some anvils will just erupt massive maelstroms of energy. Other maelstroms, like, electricity, giant firestorms, all sorts of stuff. Other anvils, if you hit it, it could be totally dead, because again, shoddy worksman. But when it comes to runes, there's a lot you can do with them, and a lot of stuff that can benefit other people, they can also be used as ways of hiding passageways. We see this with Skarsnik, and we also see this with, again, Thoric Ironbrow, where in their respective books, you'll see that some doorways and passageways are actually blocked off, and only a rune lord can figure out, hey, there's a rune nearby, and if I activate it with the right phrase, boom, I just opened up the passageway. This is where it's speculated that there's actually many secret holds and secret tunnels in Dwarven society that no one knows how to access except for the dwarves. This is especially true when it comes to Skarsnik. As we see in Karak 8 Peaks, that there's actually many tunnels that only Rune Lords can access. And as long as he has a Rune Lord in his pocket, he can activate those doorways and trap dwarves where they think they're safe, because there shouldn't be anything in those tunnels. This is something I like a lot. Now, you can actually corrupt runes and you can actually change runes, but usually to do so is extremely, extremely dangerous, and you don't know the desired effect you may have. We see this a bit with Chaos, but again, we see this again with Skarsnik Greenskins in general, where Skarsnik, what he has is Skarsnik's Prada. And his weapon is not just a giant spear that shoots out magical bolts of electricity. No, it was actually a staff at one point for a rune lord, and the staff was a staff of Valea. And what it did was one tap, boom, it would instantly heal a dwarf. Instantly. No matter how badly burned or scorned or damaged they were, boom, instantly healed. But from a ritual from a orc shaman, who is especially high as fuck on shrooms, he was able to perform a ritual where the very gods, Gork and Mork, came down and tainted the weapon and changed it from a runic weapon of healing to now what it is today, a runic weapon of fucking electric death and disintegration. So runic weapons can be altered, they can be changed, but it's a very, very risky procedure, because what can happen is the weapon just simply blows up. And we've seen this with Thoric Ironbrow, where he overused his Anvil of Doom so much and was just misusing it just because he was being ambushed by Neferata and Krell, that he just exploded it and pretty much wiped out Neferata's army, except herself and Krell. They're both fine. And of course, in doing so, he endangered most of the dwarves around him. So we do see this, that runes, although they are very powerful and they do have a lot of cool things about them, like they're very easy for non-magic users to use, they're very handy, and they're very complicated to make, they're also extremely dangerous when they break. They're extremely dangerous. We see this a lot with Skaven, where their weapons just outright break, and part of that's due to the fact that they're using like really shitty metal for their weapons that they inscribe, but also part of it is just that the magic themselves is very tainted, twisted, and corrupt, so it's very shoddy as well. So, with that being said, this has been Freer 700. I hope you guys enjoyed the runes, and I hope you guys felt like you learned something. You learned a bit about how rune crafting is usually done. You learned about how runes are usually best not to be fucking tampered with. You learned how they're different from enchanted items too, in the sense that they're not coding the weapon, they're instead in the weapon or armor, whatever it is. I just prefer saying weapon, it's a lot easier to say. Besides that, this has been Freer 700. Comment down below what you guys think. Maybe you guys love it, maybe you guys hate it, but hey, let me know.